Hi, Anna's thinking about you. The book I have today is called Franklin and Endicott and the Third Key. It's a chapter book. It has 8 chapters, and I'm going to read one chapter per video, okay? So it's going to take 8 videos to read the whole book, but we'll get it done. Okay, chapter 1. There isn't names of the chapters. It just says chapter 1. Frank Endicott was a worrier. He worried a lot. He worried about leprosy. Who wouldn't worry about leprosy? And lions. They were such alarmingly violent creatures. He worried about tests, not being properly prepared for them. He worried about black holes. What happened if you got sucked up into them? And armadillos, transmitters of leprosy. There's Franklin, sitting in his room worrying. Do you worry a lot? What kinds of things do you worry about? You know, if you talk to somebody about your worries, they seem like less of a problem. Frank worried about alligators. They looked sluggish and slow-moving, but in fact, they were not slow-moving at all. Alligators could move very, very quickly when they were motivated to do something, eat you, for instance. Frank worried about submarines, getting trapped in one, brown recluse spiders, being bitten by one, vampire bats, carriers of rabies, and rabies, which could kill you. Also, Frank worried about goats. There was no good reason to worry about goats, but Frank worried about them nonetheless. Their eyes were so unnerving and otherworldly. There's the alligators and the goats that he's worried about. He is a worrier. Frank had so many things that he worried about that he kept a notebook exclusively for his worries. He listed the worries alphabetically. He indexed them and cross-referenced them. He felt that his worries were legitimate, fact-based, and solidly researched, except perhaps for the goat worry. But Frank was embarrassed by how many worries he had. Were his worries out of control? Was he worrying excessively? It worried him to think so. Frank had a little sister named Stella, and he couldn't help it. It worried him to think that Stella would discover his notebook and read the gruesome facts recorded within its pages and become a worrier herself. So Frank started hiding the worry notebook under his bed, and that's when the nightmares began. I think that's his sister Stella. And it looks like she's surprised by what she's reading. He's hiding the notebook under his bed. They were terrifying, filled with goat eyes and speedy alligators, vicious lions, and all-consuming black holes, and also armadillos. Sometimes the dreams were so terrible, being stuck on a submarine with an armadillo, for instance, that Frank woke up screaming, and Stella had to come into his room and kneel by his bed and hold his hand and tell him that everything was going to be fine. He was safe. Frank appreciated her kindness very much, but he was also somewhat dismayed by it. He was the big brother, after all. He should be comforting her. After several nights of nightmares, Frank took the notebook out from under his bed and he moved it downstairs. There she is, comforting Frank because he had a nightmare. So he moved the notebook downstairs to the hall closet. He put it on the top shelf. The nightmares, alas, continued. Frank decided something had to change, and so one day after school, Frank went over to the Lincoln sisters' house and knocked on the door. Eugenia Lincoln answered. She looked slightly annoyed, but then Eugenia Lincoln always looked slightly annoyed. Frank was used to it. "Yes, Franklin," she said. "Good afternoon, Miss Lincoln," said Frank. "I was wondering if I might use your encyclopedias to do a bit of research." "Certainly," said Eugenia, who approved of research. "I extend you carte blanche." She opened the door open wide. Carte blanche means he can look at anything in the encyclopedias he wants. "Thank you," said Frank. He went into the Lincoln sisters' living room and stood before the Bingham Lincoln Encyclopedia set. The books had been written by the Lincoln sisters' grandfather, Bingham Lincoln, and they were very old. The entries were dense and comprehensive and featured many colorful and instructive illustrations. There he is, asking Eugenia if he can use her encyclopedias. Encyclopedias are what we used to use to research things instead of the internet. Now we look on the internet. Reading one entry naturally led to another entry and then another volume, and a slowly burgeoning belief that the world was an orderly, reasonable place, a belief that Frank very much wanted to subscribe to. "Make sure you return everything to its rightful place," said Eugenia Lincoln. "Yes, Miss Lincoln," said Frank. Baby Lincoln stuck her head into the living room. She said, "Hello, Franklin. Grandfather Lincoln would be so happy so happy to see how you appreciate his encyclopedias." "Franklin is engaged in research, baby," said Eugenia. "Do not disturb him." "Yes, sister," said Baby. Baby always agreed with Eugenia, or at least she pretended to. Baby Lincoln and Eugenia Lincoln disappeared, and Frank settled in with the encyclopedias. He followed the nightmare entry to the ancient myth entry. He read about night witches and demons and goblins and trolls. He read that in some cultures there were mythical creatures that actually consumed nightmares. So that's Baby Lincoln, and that's Eugenia, and Frank is looking at the encyclopedias. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have someone sit on the foot of your bed and eat your nightmares? But where could Frank find a creature bold enough to face his nightmares and hungry enough to devour them? Suddenly, Frank had an idea, a marvelous idea, a comforting idea. He closed the encyclopedia with a decisive thump. He gathered up his notebook with his pencils and pens. "Thank you very much," he called out to the Lincoln sisters. "I hope you returned everything to its rightful place," Eugenia shouted back. "Come again," said Baby. Frank left the Lincolns' house and went down the street and knocked on the Watsons' door. Mrs. Watson answered. "Frank," she said, "how lovely to see you." "Hello, Mrs. Watson," said Frank. "I have a somewhat unusual request." There's his imagined goblin sitting on the end of his bed eating his nightmares. That's an armadillo. That's one of Frank's nightmares, remember? He was worried about armadillos. And that's the end of chapter 1. Next video will be chapter 2. Mwah. Thanks for listening.